All right, if you're chronically online like the rest of the brain-rotten generation, then you have no doubt have seen the ads of these hunky men doing interviews about their new movie, Warfare. The newest entry in the ever-growing American dramatic subgenre I like to call War Makes Me Sad. The new film is produced by the hipster Illuminati company A24 and written and directed by British filmmaker Alex Garland. A24 also produced Garland's previous film, Civil War, which was released last year and followed a similar war-inspired story in which a fictional civil war has ravished America and a group of journalists get sad taking photos of it. So this genre is definitely in his wheelhouse. Co-writing and co-directing Warfare with Garland is a real Iraq war veteran, Ray Mendoza. The film follows the true story of a group of U.S. Navy SEALs on a surveillance mission that goes wrong in insurgent territory during the U.S.'s invasion of Iraq. Most notably, the film features a who's who of Hollywood's newest crop of attractive men, and the advertisements won't let you forget it. Ads on social media actually only show a limited amount of footage from the actual movie, and instead mostly highlight curated interviews with the cast in which the boys discuss funny stories from the production. And the supposed 3-week boot camp they all had to complete in order to, learn how to hold guns correctly and realistically LARP as soldiers. In Garland's previous A24 film, Civil War, I think the most striking element was its overly apolitical stance on literally everything in the film. The titular Civil War is purposefully never explained. No hints or clues, not even a line uttered about its origins, nothing. Instead, the film focuses on the brave journalists and photographers who stay out of the way of history in order to simply document it with supposed clarity and honesty. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, democracy dies in the dark. Creatively, the apolitical stance of the film was a baffling one. But from a marketing and business perspective, it makes a whole lot more sense. No politics equals more money. The Christian Trump supporters in Oklahoma and the libs in Manhattan would both theoretically buy tickets and leave this film without being offended. It's a win-win for A24. Now, turning back to A24 and Garland's new film, Warfare, I see a similar attempt to whitewash the actual content of the film for maximum marketing purposes. And that makes sense considering it's about one of the most evil and destructive acts of war committed in the last century. On March 20th, 2003, the United States and the United Kingdom invaded Iraq, resulting in 8 years and 9 months of pure violent hell in which over 1 million human beings were killed and over 4.5 million Iraqis were displaced. The whole war cost the U.S. taxpayer over $2 trillion and made U.S. defense contractors such as Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, and Boeing over $138 billion in profit. It all happened after the terrorist attacks on the World Trade Center on September 11, 2001. The Bush administration seized on the anger and fear caused by the horrific events to justify an ambiguous war on terror. Despite Iraq having literally no direct link to 9/11, Bush's administration nonetheless painted its president, Saddam Hussein, as a direct threat to America based on the lie that Hussein's government was in possession of or actively creating weapons of mass destruction. The United Nations even sent weapons inspectors to Iraq, but they found no evidence of these claims. Bush's administration loudly proclaimed that Iraq was simply hiding the weapons of mass destruction from the UN and launched a full-scale invasion anyways. At this point in history, even the most psychopathic, patriotic bootlickers in America recognized that the Iraq War was bad. You'd be hard-pressed to find a soul that tries publicly to justify it. The near-unanimous revisionary disgust that has emerged in the last decade thrusted the U.S. military-industrial complex into the spotlight. And this spotlight grew brighter in part to George Bush's vice president, Dick Cheney's, connections to defense contracting company Halliburton. Halliburton alone made $39.5 billion off the war alone. The defense companies achieved this heist of taxpayer dollars by mismanaging and overbilling on government contracts that they got exclusive access to through their connections with the administration. In Halliburton's case, the fraud was so egregious that the company had to move its headquarters to Dubai in 2007 to avoid scrutiny. the administrative state's reputation took a beating as well, as the overall imperialist goals of the Iraq War came into focus. Iraq sits on the 5th largest proven oil reserve in the world. In 1972, Iraq nationalized their oil industry, kicking out all the Western oil companies. After the invasion in 2003, the U.S. oversaw a massive restructuring of Iraq's oil sector, opening the door to American companies such as ExxonMobil, BP, and Shell. Even Alan Greenspan admitted this in his memoir. Quote, "I am saddened that it is politically inconvenient to acknowledge what everyone knows. The Iraq War is largely about oil." Thanks, Alan. So with defense contractors and the government agencies' reputations taking a public beating for the war, the American imperialist project hit a bit of a public relations snag, we should say. They thought to themselves, how do we continue to conquer the world without the public's blind support for the military? The answer would be to turn the narrative away from the World War II-style U.S. exceptionalism propaganda and move toward a new, more empathetic and evolved messaging that acknowledged the horrors of the wars without questioning the system that created them. This was achieved by focusing on the victims of the Iraq War. Well, some of its victims. Not the over 300,000 Iraqi civilians who lost their lives, not them. No, instead, their focus was drawn to the tortured American military veteran who would become the face of mainstream military sentiment. 4,500 U.S. military personnel were killed, 32,000 wounded, and countless suffered and continue to suffer post-traumatic stress disorder. It should go without saying that these soldiers are absolutely deserving of sympathy. Not only because they are simply human beings, but because many of them originally joined or were coerced into joining the military for reasons other than to go to war. According to the Department of Defense, roughly half of soldiers in the U.S. enlisted to escape economic hardship or lack of civilian opportunities. And this isn't their fault for seeking this pathway. The U.S. military actively targets recruitment efforts at schools in lower income zip codes. And not sure if you know this about America, but it has a fuck ton of poverty, as it spends $850 billion a year on its military while chronically underfunding domestic infrastructure, healthcare, education, and public housing. So as populations in the country become more impoverished, the military offers solutions such as free college or job training. They step in as a band-aid for the systemic inequality that they themselves are mostly responsible for creating in the first place. So needless to say, the U.S. military is built on the profits from the deep inequality of America. Many of the soldiers, as most Americans, are victims of their country's awful inequalities. But this systemic imperialist manipulation isn't the type of victimization that the U.S. military wants us to reckon with. They want to focus on what the soldier endured, rather than what the system engineered. A-list Hollywood celebrities portray soldiers as imperfect, tragic heroes, moral redeemers who are just trying to protect their brothers, damaged warriors, worthy of pity, but not critique. This framing individualizes the trauma and glorifies the action while completely obscuring the political context that put them in the war to begin with. And this is done intentionally in movies like Lone Survivor, American Sniper, 13 Hours, The Hurt Locker, Zero Dark 30. Every single one of these films had something called DoD script oversight, which is not a conspiracy theory. It's a documented, formal process where the U.S. Department of Defense gets to directly shape how the U.S. military is portrayed in films. It is officially called the Department of Defense Entertainment Media Office. This is how it works. A studio will submit a script for the DoD to review. The literal Pentagon will ensure that the script portrays the military in a positive light. If approved, the military will provide all the equipment, locations, and even extras. If the Pentagon disapproves, then the DoD can rewrite whole sections of the script. If those rewrites are turned down or denied, then the military just pulls out of the production of the movie, forcing the studio to fund the military equipment and locations themselves, which is usually way too much money to justify making the film. So essentially just canceling the film, or at the very least making it very hard to make. For the record, the war films that did not succumb to DoD script oversight are by far the best war films. Movies that deliberately avoided or were denied DoD script oversight are Coppola's Apocalypse Now, Kubrick's Full Metal Jacket, The Deer Hunter, Oliver Stone's Platoon, Jarhead, and Born on the 4th of July. That's partly why those films rock. It's because they don't come off as propaganda and are actually critical of the system that enables the mass slaughters of human beings.
Thank you for your service, bro.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
And our neighbors, Leslie and John.
What a hero you are. Thank you for your
Please.
service.
Oh, thank you. The real heroes are still there, but I appreciate it.
Thank you for your service.
Thank you.
Yeah, grateful nation.
And this is our friend Larry.
Hey, nice to meet you.
The other propaganda aspect is the conflation of supporting the troops with supporting the U.S. military. In these films, the trauma of soldiers is highlighted and pointed at to garner sympathy in the viewer, which is of course very real and deserved, obviously. However, the point here is to deflect political accountability. To then question the system can be interpreted as somehow disrespecting the troops or being unpatriotic. It deliberately blurs the line between individual soldier and imperialist machine. Soldiers aren't just disillusioned American citizens escaping a deeply flawed society at home. They are heroes, fighting for an ambiguous idea of freedom. Their resulting trauma isn't the fault of illegal or unjust wars, it's the price of their valor. The last part of all this is maybe the most important and the most egregious, but that's the stories that are untold. And the stories I'm talking about are from the segment that overwhelmingly, disproportionately makes up the bulk of the victims in this particular war. That is the Iraqis, those civilians who died so American defense contractors and oil companies could make billions in profit. Most of the times in these films, the Iraqis are either portrayed as faceless enemies or weak civilians who need some form of liberation or freedom. There's hardly much nuance to the portrayal of these characters in these films. The reality is that America invaded their country, seized their lands, and murdered hundreds of thousands of them on their soil. The entire fundamental idea of watching a movie in which our protagonists, American soldiers in this case, are literally, illegally occupying a country and using force against their population in order to enrich American corporations is baffling enough. But then to go one step further and try and elicit sympathy from the audience when they face hardship is just cruel. I don't know how else to describe it. That's like getting sad when the robbers in Home Alone get hurt. The United States not only illegally invaded a country, but also immediately disbanded the entire Iraqi military upon doing so. That is, officially firing more than 400,000 active, trained soldiers, police, and other officials. By doing so, America immediately destroyed the only functioning power structures left in the country. And not unlike the US military, as we just discussed, many of the Iraqi soldiers were not Saddam loyalists, but instead joined the military for training or to escape poverty. Now, all of a sudden, they are jobless, dishonored, and cut off from their pension income. Then on top of that, they have foreign soldiers setting up shop in their neighborhoods, waving guns in the air. Now, any red-blooded American listening to this, if the roles were reversed, how would you react? Now, yes, some of these well-trained, newly unemployed soldiers would go on to join the radical Islamist organization Al-Qaeda, but the vast majority of them would join other insurgent militias to defend their homes from an invading military force. According to the CIA and Defense Intelligence Agency, it is estimated that of the combatants America fought in the Iraq War, only 4 to 10% were actual religious extremists like Al-Qaeda. The overwhelming remaining amount of combatants that American soldiers fought in the Iraq War were either Iraqi nationalists, who we just discussed, former members of the Iraqi army, or tribal/local militias. And this last group comes from the rural areas of Iraq that are full of deeply tribal communities in which protecting one's land and people is second nature. When American soldiers raided homes, bombed their villages, and detained civilians, the local tribes did what any other self-respecting nation in the world would do. They fought back. That's not radical jihadist ideology, that's self-defense. That is resisting a foreign army on their own soil, avenging the death of their friends and family, standing up against imperialism. And that, quite frankly, sounds like a much more interesting movie to me. Some pretty heavy subject matter. And I just want to reiterate that while I don't think any form of glorification of war is healthy, or cool for that matter, that doesn't mean that I don't have sympathy for the servicemen and women who found themselves in those situations. For those who joined the military seeking relief for situations that are out of their control, I can empathize with wholeheartedly. This country is a brutally corrupt and broken place that will break a human down. It creates desperate situations, and I'm truly sorry for anyone who's found themselves in those situations. As for the A24 film Warfare, I have not seen the film. I hope that it has, an enlightened awareness around the situations that it's portraying in the film. And it is worth pointing out that the film did not seek DoD script oversight, which means they aren't beholden to the Pentagon, which is cool. Most of the best war movies did the same thing, so that's an upside. If you do end up seeing the film, reach out, let me know what you thought. Thanks again for watching.